And something I worry about, anytime I don't trust the government, and I am part of the government, and I don't mind telling you that, but anytime we have our hands on something, you know, whether it be Epstein files or whatever, I have a hard time believing it. Have a hard time believing anything these knuckleheads come in here and tell me, and whether we're in a skiff or anywhere else. They're so compartmentalized, and they're so, you know, maybe they're telling the truth, but it's the truth as they know it. And they're looking down the barrel of a 22, and they need to be looking down a trash can, because I think it's that big. Yeah, it says 10 minutes. Don't give me that. I'll have an altar call up here. Yeah. So they don't. You know why they don't let politicians? If you can find me some one-armed deacons, I'd be a pastor, but I don't trust them with two hands. Thank you, y'all, for being here. I guess I am one of those that on the edge of the conspiracy theorist. I was at Brushy Mountain Prison. I saw James Earl Ray when I was a young man, about 16. We used to minister to a guy who was on death row, since been electrocuted in Tennessee. And I was always reminded, I've read some books by the mob, and they always have a scapegoat. And it's always a loner, kind of a nut. But I think things need to be said. Ray was a two-bit criminal. They caught him in London, England. I mean, what I understand, he didn't have two nickels to rub together. And he had it was 68. I remember we were going to Clarksville, Tennessee, and I heard it on the radio. I remember it because they said, they were talking about President Kennedy and RFK, and then Martin Luther King had been shot. And it didn't register with me. I was 4 years old, but I can remember. But I've since studied it, and it's always a loner. It's always a nut. It just seems to me it's just too dadgum convenient. And the mob will tell you that's what they do. When they kill somebody, they always have a scapegoat. And I remember what a pastor friend of mine, who's never voted for me, by the way, in Knoxville, and I'm naming a post office after him anyway, but because he's my dear friend. And he was in Memphis. He worked for Dr. King. I guess he was 17 or 18 years old. And I always remember I was mayor of Knox County. I went to the NAACP breakfast or dinner that night, big fundraiser. And, you know, they had me sitting at the head table. And I asked Middlebrook where he was sitting. And they said, they got me over here. And I said, well, Kelly and I, my wife and I, we're going to sit with you. And he said, why is that? And I said, because you run with the one that brung you. And I said, these kids are standing on your shoulders. They think civil rights is something on the History Channel or something. And we'd always have Middlebrook come eat dinner with us, lunch, with the young kids in my office at Calhoun's. And I remember my dear friend Colonel Julian said, preacher, how many times were you arrested in Memphis? And he said, Colonel, I think about 37. And you just think how things have changed and how, we talk about how bad they are. I'll tell you what, in Knoxville, Tennessee, East Tennessee, things are pretty good. Things are pretty good. We're moving in a better direction, I feel like. But I do feel like I don't, and is it true that some members of the King family talked to Ray, James Earl Ray, and they don't think that he pulled the trigger? Is that accurate, ma'am?
My cousin, Dexter Scott King, is deceased.
Yes, ma'am.
But during his lifetime, he was involved in some of those discussions. I was not personally, but yes, I was aware of that, yes.
Okay, and Dexter was Dr. King's
son.
His boy? Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I remembered very well when James Earl Ray escaped from Brushy, and because Dr. King's daddy, who was also a preacher, was in Tennessee at that time, just totally out of Iran. They caught him. They caught James Earl Ray just down the road. It was something, he didn't get very far. He wasn't that great of a criminal, and he sure wasn't that good of an escape artist. But I'm wondering, ma'am, why are some certain pieces of the surveillance, why do you feel like they're still under seal until 2027? And something I worry about, anytime I don't trust the government, and I am part of the government, and I don't mind telling you that, but anytime we have our hands on something, whether it be Epstein files or whatever, I have a hard time believing it. I have a hard time believing anything these knuckleheads come in here and tell me. And whether we're in a skiff or anywhere else, they're so compartmentalized and they're so, maybe they're telling the truth, but it's the truth as they know it. And they're looking down the barrel of a 22, And they need to be looking down a trash can because I think it's that big. I'm sorry I talked too much, but please.
May I answer it in this way? And I'm only speaking not for the whole family.
Yes, ma'am.
And certainly in a very unofficial, personal capacity. There are so many people that are in those reports, and I think that has been said, who are gone on beyond. And so since you can't find them and you can't verify, it wouldn't necessarily make sense to have so much of that we forget the purpose. And the purpose is to come together in truth and unity. Yes. So that's just my thought. I can't say that's why, but that's what I think.
Okay, and I've run over. Let me ask the ranking member if I could just go a little bit. And I will tell you this. I saw a lady walking down the hall from a far distance, and she was wearing bright pink. And I said, where is she going? I thought, and then she got closer, and I was about to say, Jasmine, we're supposed to be in committee. And then she got closer, and I realized it wasn't Jasmine. So if somebody comes up to you and says, this idiot Burchett just, But anyway, she was lovely and dressed classy like you do. So I wanted to say that for the record and then ask you if I could have a little more time. Okay, great. Let me ask you, Mr. Wexler, and then maybe you, sir. What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on why the files are sealed. It's a little bit of speculation, but I'll give you a twofold answer. One, it was self-serving for the FBI. There was a time when, the public was really outraged when we found out that they were doing this stuff, and it's kind of, and should be.
Let me stop you right there real quick. I remembered when we had, we were doing something on JFK, and Rev Zim Luna is great about bringing this stuff in. We had a doctor that was in the emergency room with JFK, and he said, he even had a diagram, and he showed the two different bullets coming from two different directions in the diagram. Now, 10 years ago, that'd have been ABC, NBC, CBS, everybody would have blown it up. But that's just what they do. They delay. And what Dr. King said, I think, that these people die, and then there's nothing out there. And then all we got is vapor. But sorry, go ahead, sir.
And then my second would be is that...
And this place ought to be filled up with angry people right now. Angry congresswomen and men ought to be ticked off. I'm sorry.
And the second, I do think there's an element where, as it gets later on in time to what I believe Dr. King was getting at, where you start to say that you're releasing information that never should have been collected in the first place.
I got you.
That you don't even know if it's true. And again, I could speak to you if somebody asked me about what happened to somebody named Reverend Ed King, which was just outrageous, and I could explain that in a further question. And maybe, you start to realize now we shouldn't release this stuff because we should never have taken and collected it and put out this nonsense in the first place.
It doesn't have anything to do with what's going on or what went on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary concern is that it was illegally obtained and should never have been obtained. And I think just generally we should be careful about releasing surveillance, even if it was lawfully obtained.
I mean, even if it's legal, it doesn't make. I mean, slavery technically was legal in this country, but it's the most horrid thing that we ever did.
I would say, for instance, the legal standard for obtaining metadata is lower. We'd obviously support raising that, but if someone collected your metadata and they did it legally, you wouldn't want that released to the public, even though it was collected unlawfully.
Okay, I'm out of time, but I do think this was a cover-up. And remember, Dr. Middlebrook told me, he said that they, and I'm a gun guy, and that shot he made had 1 foot on a toilet and 1 foot in a bathtub, and he leaned over to make the shot. And the next day, they had cut all the brush out from that flop house he was in, that Ray was in front of it. So I think, and I've talked to so many people from Memphis I served in the legislature with, and they just think it's been covered up. And I don't know if we'll ever know on this side of eternity. But I want to thank y'all. I'm sorry I rattled. Dr. King, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your walk with Jesus, and I appreciate your kind words that we had. Thank y'all for being here.